Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Xi Jinping hosts Putin and Modi at China's Security Summit as they reaffirm their close ties without the USA. A deadly 6.0 earthquake rocks eastern Afghanistan, leaving hundreds dead and thousands injured. And Israel says Hamas spokesman Abu Obaida is killed in a Gaza airstrike as tensions and civilian casualties continue to rise. Leaders from over 20 countries have gathered in Tianjin for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, where Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin promoted a new global order prioritizing the global south. Xi called for greater representation for developing nations, while Putin hailed the bloc's push for genuine multilateralism. The summit also highlighted plans for the new SCO Development Bank and billions in Chinese aid and loan members to states. To discuss this and all of today's stories, we're joined in the studio by Managing Director of This.Is.Dubai, that's Michael Jabri-Pickett, and Deputy Editor of The Spectator, Freddy Gray, who is live with us from London. Thank you both very much for joining us, first of all. Earlier, we did speak to Commodore Chit Rapu Uday Bhaskar, who is the Director of Society for Political Studies in New Delhi. But, Michael, I want to turn to you first on this story and find out, is it China and Russia carving out their own sphere of influence, do you think, here?
I think it is a little of that, and I also think it's about owning the narrative. I think what China, Russia, and India would like to do is set the table and let the world know, specifically an audience of one, President Donald Trump, that they have options. Now, the reality, however, is I do not believe that they do. They can enhance trade amongst the three of them, as well as the other 17 countries that are participating. But the reality is that the US GDP is worth $30 trillion. Number two is China at $19 trillion. The US is the market that everybody wants access to. And why I feel so strongly about this is that if you look at what President Xi said in his comments throughout the day, there was a lot of rhetoric, much like Donald Trump, and a lack of substance, much like Donald Trump. And I, again, repeat this, I think it was geared for an audience of one, Donald Trump.
So you think that this is all about optics and creating an illusion that there's this unified trifecta of power that may or may not actually be real? Is that what you think?
I think it's wanting to send the message that the Global South has options outside of the US, but I think Donald Trump knows how important the US market is. I don't think he'll be swayed too much by the rhetoric.
Freddie, to you, Xi talks about true multilateralism. Do you see that as genuine? Do you think that's code for weakening US dominance?
No, I think that is genuine to a certain extent. I share some of Michael's skepticism, and I agree they are thinking about Donald Trump a lot. But the ways in which they're thinking about Donald Trump are very interesting. And of course, it's a lot to do with tariffs, Donald Trump's infamous tariffs. And there are two very good and contradictory arguments that people seem to be having about this. One is that Trump, or the State Department, the Treasury, the people around Trump, are playing a very, very clever game in which they are disrupting the BRICS, and particularly China, Russia, and India. They're disrupting the sort of growing economic alliance that those countries have. And there are some good arguments to suggest that might be true, and this meeting, this event this week might be a statement against that. Another argument is that actually Trump's tariffs are bringing these countries even closer together in a sort of increasingly powerful economic bloc against America. And while Michael's right to say everybody wants a piece of the American economy, it's the biggest by far and so on, there's no denying that these countries are cooperating more, perhaps because they see America as a more unreliable partner. And that's not just to do with Trump's tariffs, it's to do with a sort of exhaustion with America as the preeminent superpower.
And of course, India being hugely influential in this as well. And I want to show both of you gentlemen this, if I may. Earlier I spoke to Commodore Chidrapu Uday Bhaskar, who's the Director of Society for Political Studies in New Delhi, and I asked him how significant it was for President Narendra Modi to be riding shoulder to shoulder, as he put it, with Putin. Have a listen to this.
I would describe the symbolism of Prime Minister Modi being in the same car as President Putin as very significant. And very significant because of the current global geopolitical context, and particularly the manner in which the United States and President Donald Trump have sought to intimidate India with the trade tariffs. So this symbolism, in my view, works at two levels. One is India, I think, is sending a strong signal to the world and President Trump that the relationship with Russia is an important one, and India remains committed to it. And second, for President Putin, if I may add, at a time when the United States and its allies have sought to ostracize him, and they have used some very strong language against him because of the war in Ukraine, he is now back in global focus, particularly in China at the summit that President Xi is hosting. So I think this is significant symbolism, both for President Putin and for Prime Minister Modi.
Lots of mentions there from Commodore Bhaskar that it's a lot of symbolism that's going on here. Michael, we're also seeing a relationship that's been formed. It seems that India is trying to do its best. We heard in that full interview that at a time when the rest of the world was not trading with Russia when it came to oil, that India was the main reason why the price of a barrel of oil stayed below $95. It was that important trade that continued to keep the price of a barrel down. So I think, have we underestimated the importance of the India-Russian coalition now mixing China into this as well?
It's funny, I think Donald Trump has done amazing things in different countries in the first 7 months that he's been back in office. I think he played a part in bringing Canadians together for their election. I think he played a part in bringing Australians together for their election. And I think he's playing a part in bringing India and China together. I think President Xi said, he alluded to the elephant and the dragon dancing together in his comments today. India and China have had a tense relationship over the years. They share a border. They've had some skirmishes as well over the past number of years as well. And yet here they are together, hand in hand with Vladimir Putin, who is in most countries, a wanted war criminal, certainly a pariah on the global stage. And yet Donald Trump has brought everybody together as they are trying to show to him that they have options besides the United States, even if they're just trying to play a bit of a game with him.
Freddie, what do you think? Should the West be maybe a bit concerned that we're seeing this palsy-walsy dance around, and we'll talk more about that in just a second as well, but we'll show you some images of this. A Vladimir Putin that we're not used to seeing, which is quite handsy and almost jovial in his stance. Should the West be worried that this is the friendship that's been formed?
I mean, absolutely. It is a big concern for the West. I mean, particularly when it comes to India. Western geostrategy, Washington's strategy for a long time has been to curry favor with India and to kind of pull it away from China's influence, and to make India the rival superpower to China in Asia. But I mean, what you're seeing now is that Donald Trump is, particularly with the tariff threats, is forming a new friendship with Pakistan, which was, of course, India's great rival and enemy in some ways, and also pretty much a satellite in some ways of China. And now you're having this strange mix-up of relationships where Trump is suddenly making friendly noises about Pakistan, and India and China are making strangely friendly noises towards each other. So things are very, very jumbled, and it could come out to the West's benefit, but it could also go very, very wrong for America. And I think some American strategists and analysts in Washington are worried about that.
I want to just ask you as well on this, Michael, when we spoke about this earlier on, we discussed how Narendra Modi has been actually quite vocal on saying how the war in Ukraine benefits nobody. Is this now emerging India as somewhat of a player in the Ukraine war game? Do you think that that's a possibility as well? Because up until now, their opinion had neither been rhyme nor reason for this entire debate?
I don't think that that's so much of an issue. It was just a few weeks ago that Vladimir Putin was in the U.S. Riding in the beast with the President of the United States. So I think that when it comes to these sorts of meetings, I don't think there's an expectation that any particular leader needs to make sure that they speak out against the war. I think that that relationship with Vladimir Putin is more important when you're meeting with him, rather than making sure that you say the right things in a politically correct sense about how you're against the war.
Thank you both so much for your thoughts on that. We'll move on to our next story. And a strong magnitude 6.0 earthquake has hit eastern Afghanistan, which has killed at least 800 people and injured over 2,000. Rescue teams are currently racing to reach remote mountainous areas, but we're hearing that landslides and also damaged roads are slowing the efforts down. The quake was felt across the region, including in neighbouring Pakistan, and aftershocks are continuing to shake communities which are already struggling with severe humanitarian challenges. Freddie, first to you on this. 800 lives lost, and that's just at first count. Entire villages have been wiped out in Afghanistan. Are they even equipped to handle a disaster of this scale, especially under Taliban rule?
Well, it feels a little bit cheap to kind of try and score points against the Taliban in the wake of a tragedy. But I mean, it is undeniable that Afghanistan's government lacks the kind of essential infrastructure that you need to respond to an emergency like this. And I think the Taliban are trying to be as open as they can about this particular tragedy. However, questions will be raised in future weeks about the response and so on. And I think it's interesting, we've just been talking about multilateralism and so on. And, 5-10 years ago, it would have fallen to the West, to America and to Western powers to launch a response about this. And in Afghanistan, it would have been ever more present because we would have been involved in that endless and ultimately pointless war that we conducted in Afghanistan for a long time. But today what we're seeing is a far more multilateral aid response. America's soft power with aid has diminished somewhat. You're seeing the UAE offering aid. You're seeing other countries come forward and offer aid. So it's more of a multilateral humanitarian response that we're seeing now, as the West, as the preeminent superpower, does seem to be somewhat in retreat.
I'm going to just take on your point there, Freddie, and throw to Michael on this. We're seeing a handful of countries come to the aid of Afghanistan. And I feel like when it's a natural disaster, on this scale certainly, we normally see hundreds of countries come to the aid. Do you think that perhaps there may be some sort of an international intervention here where people will say, right, we'll step in directly? Or are you worried, Michael, that the optics that are concerned with it being the Taliban in power here may lead to a lack of aid for the people who really need it on the ground?
You would like to think that in times of natural crises, that people would come together to help the fact that there are people that are in need. Mm-hmm. People have died. And family members are without homes, maybe without food, and maybe in need of medical supplies. You would like to think that the global community would sort of rise above politics. And maybe it's my left-leaning ways, but I think it's also a wonderful opportunity for countries to come in and to curry favor with the Taliban. Now, do you want to build a long-lasting relationship with them? Maybe not all the time, because there are so many reprehensible policies that the Taliban perpetuate. But you would like to be able to have a relationship with everybody if you are in the game of politics. And you want to make sure that even in times of need, you are able to be there to help out. So at some point, maybe there is a favor that you're able to extract that works towards your advantage. I
think there's probably a Western ideology that there may be very few times that you will have to rely on the Taliban to call in a favour, and that might be what's stopping the aid being sent at this particular stage, but it's early days.
Yeah, it is, and I think that there are certain countries, Canada, the US, Russia, for instance, pop to mind, the UK, where maybe they're feeling a little bit jaded about their experiences in Afghanistan. Understandable. But again, you have to be thinking, the long game. And I think that that's what the world needs, a little bit more of people coming together to help those in need, so that at some point there can be a stronger relationship down the road.
I think we're getting very bits and pieces more than anything else, correspondence from what's happening in Afghanistan on the ground. And the true picture will take a couple of days to play out. But earlier I spoke to the former Afghan Minister of Interior Affairs, that's Mohammed Omar Dadzai, and asked him if there was a concern about the West turning a blind eye. Have a listen to this.
I think many countries or most countries in the region have offered assistance, but I hope the Taliban change their policies, let the international NGOs to operate freely, let the Afghan NGOs to also operate freely so that the aid can get to the needy people. The worst affectees are women and children, and Taliban's policies are always against women. So they will have to change. And also to prepare for future. Afghanistan is a disaster-prone zone. There are floods, there are earthquakes. You said this is the biggest. Yes, this is the biggest, but this is the third earthquake that has caused damage within this year, in 2025. So the country is a disaster-prone, but Taliban doesn't have the right policy, doesn't have the right capacity, and those who were trained in the 20 years on the Republic, they dismissed them and they all left the country. So basically people without experience, management experience, technical experience, they're all in charge.
Freddy, as we heard there, more than just the earthquakes, there's the aftershocks that we have to worry about. There's the flooding that's happening. There's the landslides as well. And now we're hearing of women and children who are being trapped as men have gotten themselves out of there. I mean, it doesn't look good. Optics-wise, from the outside point of view looking in, does not look great for the Taliban regime.
It's obviously terrible on any number of fronts, and it's a tragedy that's happening in sort of semi-darkness because we just don't have enough visibility, we don't have enough media visibility, we don't have enough open scrutiny of what's going on there. It is interesting we're talking about the West turning a blind eye. It's interesting to see your correspondent there talking about Afghanistan refusing international aid, which it regards with some suspicion and as a sort of attempt to corrupt Afghanistan. And so I hope for everybody's sake that international aid is accepted and offered on as many fronts as possible.
And a fair point to take on from what Freddy said, Michael. Regardless of the Western political recognition of the Taliban, it is a time when people are in crisis here as well. What do you do if the Taliban just say, we don't require any assistance from the West, we'll be okay, we've got this on our own? Now that we know there are crippling infrastructures when it comes to hospitals and 2 helicopters that are at the disposal of these people who are victims.
I mean, look, the Taliban are determined people. Certainly they have, withstood a lot of efforts to be unseated over several decades. They are going to stick to what it is that they believe in. But I do believe that, your neighbors need to step up and offer. And they need to do the best to make sure that they can get in as best as possible. But at the end of the day, of course, it is going to be up to the Taliban to say yes or no. But you have to be able to feel that you've done all that you can do, and then leave it up to the Taliban to decide what they would like.
And Freddy, finally, before we move on from this, if the West was still in Afghanistan, they were still on the ground, would you say there would be a different response, a humanitarian response to this?
Well, yes, and that's not to say I approved of the West's intervention or 20-year war in Afghanistan. I think it was a disaster on any number of fronts. But yes, I think that you would have had a more immediate and urgent humanitarian assistance probably would have been made available, yes.
Well, thank you both so much for your thoughts on that. We're going to move on to our next story. Hamas's military spokesman, Abu Obaida, has reportedly been killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. Now, Israel says that, but Hamas have yet to confirm it. The strike hit a residential building in the densely populated Al Ramal neighbourhood, killing at least 7 civilians, while 20 others, including children, have been injured. Israel's defence minister praised the operation, warning that more Hamas leaders could be targeted as the military prepares a major offensive in Gaza. Michael, I'll turn to you first on that. If they did, in fact, if they have killed Abu Obaida, which, by the way, may take months to confirm because Hamas historically have a history of delaying things for months and months, is this going to hurt them in any meaningful way, do you think?
I don't think it's going to have any impact. Hamas has been, I'm going to use the word incorrectly here, but they've been decimated. There are so few strong militant senior figures in Gaza left, the power and the decision-making rests with Israel. And we have to accept that Israel is going to continue to do what they think is best. Getting another Hamas militant operative is important to them, and they won't stop, as they've said. More will come. But I don't think that this has any bearing on anything that Hamas can do. The only control, and I think that they have now, is the control of the fallen as well as the living hostages. After that, I think Hamas is pretty much irrelevant.
So you think that if they don't have the hostages, there is no bargaining chip, there's no tool, and effectively Hamas would be defeated?
100%.
If Israel then go in and launch the on-ground offensive, which we know will likely result in the hostages being killed, probably immediately.
That's the fear, yes.
Then would you say that Hamas effectively is decimated at the end of that?
So I think that we're incorrectly treating Hamas and Israel as though they're equals and they're on the same playing field, and they're not. When was the last time Hamas launched any offensive against the IDF? It's been a long time. Mm-hmm. There is nothing within Hamas that they can do to challenge the IDF. So it doesn't matter what happens with Hamas. It doesn't matter who they kill. Only insofar as Hamas not looking, but so long as Hamas continues to have the hostages, that I think is the problem for the Israelis, and it's the only source of power or strength that Hamas has left.
Freddy, civilians, including children, we've heard just a moment ago, have been killed in the same strike. Israel, do you think it's undermining its own case internationally by carrying out an operation on this scale?
I think internationally the opinion has turned against Israel, and that is very broadly international, as in all over the world. I mean, if you think back to the Beeper attack in 2024 against last year, I should say, against Hezbollah targets, there was this sort of instant awe at Israel's ability to decapitate its enemies' military commanders, its key figures of its enemies. And I think that has now gone now, and people focus on civilian casualties, which there often are with these Israeli attacks. And that is a sign of how Israel is losing the war in the court of global public opinion.
And there is the civilian casualties in any of these attacks, as we mentioned. There are always civilian casualties. Earlier, I spoke to the Middle East correspondent, Yotam Confino, who said there is always likely to be civilian casualties when it comes to hunting down a high-profile enemy like this. Take a listen.
When you go out and kill your enemy, there will most likely be civilian casualties. But in terms of how you can justify it and how many civilians, it's really a case-by-case basis. So according to international law, you can go after your enemy high-value targets and still have civilian casualties. And for Israel, they say that this is just the name of the game. When Hamas are hiding behind civilians, there will always be civilian casualties. So even though it seems very cynical to say that civilians, such as in this case, will be killed, this is just the name of the game in international law. Civilians can get killed whenever there is a high-value target that the enemy is going after.
And as we look at the civilian toll, which has been obviously daily, we're seeing it in the media, but there is now another flotilla which has been sent as well. We saw this, a flotilla that's been sent from Barcelona to Gaza as well. With experts, and even when we spoke to Yotam earlier on, he said he expects that will not only be intercepted, but that the people on board that flotilla will be taken into custody, not just put on a plane and sent back home like we've seen previously, but that they will be officially detained for their efforts to try and once again go against the blockade and get aid through into Israel. Surely getting any aid through is what we need to see right now, Michael.
It is, but again, I've said this many times, the international community has spoken out in the way that you would expect them to speak out, right? Oh, we're disappointed, we're disheartened, we're not pleased, we don't like this. What they need to do is, if they really believe in trying to make a difference, is you need to affect your ally in a way that's going to have the greatest impact. And if you want an ally to change its course of action, then make sure that you stop allowing Israeli flights in and out of the country or to land in your country. Stop issuing visas to Israelis. You have to be proactive. Stop trade with Israel. You have to be incredibly assertive. Israel has been able to pretty much do what they want for 2 years without any repercussions. Yes, there's been condemnation from certain countries over the course of the past 23 months. But by and large, if they want to assassinate or fire missiles into Yemen or Syria or Lebanon, they're able to go ahead and to do that. Mm-hmm. So when Australia or Canada or the UK or France come out and say something about how they're displeased about what it is that Israel is doing, I can't believe that they really think that that's going to make a difference. So with the flotilla, the Israelis will do what they think is best for Israel. And if that means taking these guys, men and women, into custody and holding them, then they will.
Freddy, even though we know that this is now one of the lead members of Hamas that we've seen taken out of the equation, there are still Israeli forces who are launching an on-ground offensive as well. Is that really still needed now that we know that the majority of figureheads within Hamas are no longer in the country? They're not in Gaza anymore. We're hearing that they're in Turkey or they're in Qatar.
Well, points towards the mystery of Israel's ultimate end game here. David Petraeus famously asked in Iraq, American general said, tell me, how does this end? It's hard to see what Israel now wants to achieve because it can't endlessly decapitate Hamas, because that doesn't seem to be a viable strategy for what they want to do in Gaza. So the question is, what then does a ground invasion achieve? Nobody quite knows the answer now. Donald Trump is desperately trying to figure it out, possibly with the help of Tony Blair, of all people. But the great mystery here is, what is the actual end game for Gaza, for the region? Is the two-state solution completely finished? These are questions that Israel is not answering through these assassinations and so on.
Freddy, Michael, thank you both so much for your thoughts on that. We're going to move on to our next story, much lighter. Germany is traditionally known for its love of beer, with over 8 billion litres produced every single year. But this year, it's been different. Sales have slumped below 4 billion litres, with many breweries admitting that Germans are drinking less and they're opting for non-alcoholic alternatives. Freddy, I'll turn to you cautiously first on this one. Is it a shift towards alcohol-free beer? Is that for a healthier reason, or is this really, truly the end of a centuries-old drinking culture and tradition?
Well, in Germany, it does look like quite a significant dip in drinking. And even though, yes, non-alcoholic beers are being drunk more and more, and they're a bigger share of the market, the overall consumption of beer, alcoholic and non-alcoholic, has gone down dramatically. And I think this is to do with all the stories that we've heard for many years, that young people are more interested in taking pictures of themselves than they are going out drinking. And for someone like me, I regard that as sad, but probably that's for the best for young people overall, I'd say. You
think it's for the best for health reasons, or you think it's for the best for their social media cred?
Oh, no, terrible for their souls and their personality, but for their health, I think for the best. I mean, I think one of the reasons people don't like drinking so much is booze is very fattening, and young people love taking pictures of themselves, particularly topless. And so I think a strong incentive for young people to not drink is so they can keep their beach body ready. And I think that feeds into a terrible culture of narcissism and self-obsession.
I mean, there's a huge conversation to have there with regards to a lot of people who suffer from body dysmorphia in the modern age. Michael, alcohol-free beer, which is, we're seeing a huge resurgence in this at the moment. Is it ever really going to capture the same cultural role that traditional German beer has had for generations upon generations?
I think not with the up-and-coming generation. I think that there's a different perception when it comes to Gen Zs in particular about alcohol. My kids will be 29 this month, and they are living in Canada. Canada is a country where cannabis, for instance, is legal. So they would much rather take a gummy than they would drink some alcohol. Also, Social media has done a lot of harm, but it's done a lot of good. And one of the areas in which it's done a lot of good is that they've helped shine a light on a conversation that I think needs a lot of attention, which is mental health. And people are so much more aware as a result about mental health, what to look out for, when to know if somebody is feeling some pain. And alcohol does not help mental health issues at all. And I think because of the awareness about mental health and some of the realities about alcohol consumption, people have decided to drink less. And that's a global trend. It's not just in Germany.
Freddie, you're in London, so you'll tell us a bit more about this, but there's now overnight drinking there until 6 o'clock in the morning. So I don't know if necessarily the culture is going away. People are still going out. Are they just replacing one vice with another? Is that what we're seeing happening?
Well, a little bit. I think that, one thing we're seeing in London in particular is that while overall drinking habits among young people are going down, the young people that are drinking in increasingly violent and dangerous ways. And so you're getting a sort of smaller core of people drinking far too much, far too intensively. But Britain, as I'm sure a lot of viewers will know, has had a heavy binge drinking culture for a very, very long time, centuries, arguably. And it's very hard to change that. No matter how much you tax alcohol and so on, British people tend to find a way to drink. And even though young people are drinking less, by the time they reach their 30s and 40s, they tend to fall into patterns of drinking that are similar. Although I understand the latest data suggests that isn't the case, but my bet is that Brits will still be drinking in 100 years.
When we look at these alcohol-free alternatives, and there is some evidence that yes, there's a slight calorie reduction in that as well. But is there a reason? Is it social or otherwise why people would choose to have a alcohol-free beverage when they're in a social setting? What do you think the reason is behind that, Michael?
So I do think that there is something to be said about socializing with your peers when you are also on equal footing. And so if you're drinking a beer or what looks like a beer, and I'm drinking what looks like a beer, then I think there's an equality, and I think there's an opportunity for more sharing and bonding. Now, yours is alcoholic and mine's non-alcoholic. Nobody has to know that. But aesthetically, it looks like we're the same, and I think that helps people feel more comfortable with each other.
Freddie, Germany has relied on this, not as its sole source, but I will say that it's a large part of German culture for a long time, and something like this would affect things like Oktoberfest, which is not just a German tradition now, but has spread to worldwide. So perhaps this is a concern in terms of, culturally speaking, from Germany specifically.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't have had the beer hall putsch either if you didn't have beer in Germany. I think beer is a more integral part of German culture than it is even in Britain. So it is very strange to see young Germans moving away from alcohol or from drinking this kind of beer. I don't know the data on whether they're trying to drink less calorific forms of alcohol, as we see in America in particular. The alcoholic seltzers are quite popular because that's seen as a sort of low-fat way of consuming alcohol.
Is there a cost factor involved in this as well? Is that coming into play?
Yes, there is a small cost. I mean, I know from in London, drinking non-alcoholic beer is slightly cheaper, not as cheaper as you'd expect, but it is slightly cheaper.
And as somebody who works in events quite a lot, if you're having events and they're going alcohol-free and you're saying all of our beverages today are completely alcohol, sans alcohol, would that be an absolute disaster, do you think, or could it be something that would work over time?
Well, a large part of my job has involved getting politicians to drink alcohol so that they will share stories with me that they wouldn't normally share. So it would be a disaster in terms of the journalism trade.
No good videos emerging from the future parties that you have, which would be a disaster. Thank you both so much for your thoughts on that. It is now that time of the show where both Michael and Freddie have got two of the quirkier stories of the day. Michael, we'll turn to you first, and your homeland of Canada is heading to the moon, it seems.
Yes. This is the news of the day. So a Canadian aerospace company has created, or they're in the process of building a rover that they will be able to have driving on the surface of the moon. Now, this rover This is, of course, incredibly important because what they're trying to do is determine the radiation levels, as well as the big issue is they want to be able to determine if there's water on the moon. They want to ultimately use the moon as kind of a base so that they can explore the rest of the galaxy. And this 35-kilogram rover needs to be able to withstand an incredible temperature range of about 300 degrees Celsius. So during the days, it can get as hot as 100 degrees, but then at night, it can get to minus 200. And then, of course, there's also the challenge of what is on the surface itself, where it's described as Velcro dirt, which essentially means that it can start to gum up a lot of the mechanisms. So this rover has to be able to maneuver over this type of terrain and also making sure that it can withstand the temperatures. And of course, this is not the first time that Canada has played a part in missions in space. They've sent astronauts. They had the Canada arm that they built. So it's part of what's I'd like to think of as a growing, rich tradition of Canadian aerospace technology.
This is just the beginning for Canadian aerospace technology.
No, it's the middle. We've been doing this for a while, my friend.
So if we do end up finding water on the moon base, how much easier is it then to have deep space travel as a result? Is the moon then your springboard to get to someplace like Mars?
Absolutely. That is the plan. They want to make sure that they can, maybe colonize is too strong a word, but they want to be able to use the moon as a base, and then from there you can fly off to other locations that are, again, much further away, but that's the starting point as opposed to having to use Earth as the starting point.
Go Canada, and put the word Canada before anything that they're going to have up on the moon, or anywhere in space. In fact, it has to have Canada at the start of it.
It does,
right?
indeed.
It's the important part. Freddie, I know that we've spoken before about Jude Law taking on the role of President Putin in a brand new movie, but now he's received a standing ovation in Venice for this role.
Well, yes. So the first thing I want to say on this story is that I'm very suspicious about standing ovation inflation at film events across the world, but particularly Venice and Cannes. Venice in particular seems to be a real culprit for this, where at the end of a performance, a lot of celebrities there, a lot of theatre people, thespians, get up and they give a very, very long standing ovation to the actor who is in the audience himself or herself. And Jude Law got a 10-minute one. I think George Clooney got a 12-minute one last week. So I get a little bit suspicious about how much clapping is going on and backslapping is going on at these events. But it does seem as though Jude Law, I mean, critics are saying that Jude Law is extremely good as Vladimir Putin. And when I last spoke to you about this, I raised some doubts because I thought that Jude Law was far too good looking to be Vladimir Putin, for one thing. And I also know that the book, The Wizard of the Kremlin, is famously a pretty terrible book. So I'm quite struck that it's received all this international attention and been turned into a film. But apparently, the first critics are saying that this is a very good film and Jude Law is excellent.
We should point out they did use prosthetics and they have aged him quite a lot to look more like Vladimir Putin in the movie. But
yeah.
Michael, if you were Jude Law, would you be concerned for your welfare given the fact that you just portrayed one of the most powerful men in the world and he may not like the portrayal?
You're thinking I could be walking down the street with a poison-tipped umbrella?
Just wondering if it's a thing.
I don't think that Vladimir Putin cares too much about what Hollywood is doing with... in fact, I think he would prefer that they got distracted by that so that he could continue with his strategy on the battlefield.
Okay. And if I was to ask you, Freddie, who would you have cast instead, now that you think Jude Law is far too attractive to play Vladimir Putin, which, having seen the videos and the pictures, I don't necessarily agree. Who would you have cast instead?
Well, it's hard to answer this without insulting any particular actor, because I'm now suggesting they're not attractive. But I think Toby Jones, the British actor, resembles Vladimir Putin a little bit facially. And he's about the right height. He may even be a bit shorter. So I would go for him.
Why not a Russian actor is the big question. Michael, I'll pass to you first on this. Why not a Russian actor to play the Russian leader?
So we were talking about this. I couldn't think of any well-known Russian... I couldn't think of a Russian actor to begin with. But Viggo Mortensen played a Russian in Eastern Provinces. I thought did an amazing job. But I would be more interested in, and maybe I'm being too artistic here, I I think I would be more interested in the artistic interpretation rather than the aesthetic, the appearance. I would want somebody whose persona would maybe capture the persona of Vladimir Putin. So for me, one of the images I think that we all remember so well is Vladimir Putin shirtless on a horse. So who is the actor that can pull that off? And Arnold Schwarzenegger comes to mind.
Daniel Craig.
Somebody who has that level of arrogance and also that confidence to do pretty much whatever they want on the global stage or, on a horse in a river.
And that, gentlemen, is why none of us are involved in casting movies for Hollywood or anywhere for that matter. I want to thank our guests in studio. First of all, to Managing Director of This.Is.Dubai, to Michael Jabri-Pickett. And live in London, the Deputy Editor of The Spectator, that's Freddy Gray. Thank you both so very much for joining us on the show. Don't forget, as always, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and you can follow us on X. Coming up next, though, GNT with Tom Burgess-Watson. That's on the way. Goodbye.